Nathan Cole Harper slammed the ledger shut so hard the lamp on his desk rattled and nearly fell. His hand was shaking, not from anger, from something worse, from the sick, hollow recognition that the numbers in front of him were not wrong. That every column Amelia Whitmore had marked in red ink, every page she had dog-eared, every quiet question she had asked him over the past 4 days had been pointing at the same terrible truth, and he had spent 30 years refusing to see it. He stood up from the chair, walked to the window, pressed his forehead against the cold glass, and stared out at 4,000 acres of land that had his grandfather's blood in the soil, and his father's sweat in every fence post, and he felt for the first time in his life like a man who did not deserve to be standing on it. If you have ever watched something you built with your whole heart begin to crumble, and you did not understand why until it was almost too late, then stay with this story. Subscribe to this channel right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from, because I want to know how far this story has traveled, and do not leave until the very last word, because what happens between Nathan Harper and Amelia Whitmore is not just a story about a ranch. It is a story about what pride costs a man, what courage looks like on a woman everyone dismissed, and what two broken people can build when they finally stop being afraid of the truth. Nathan Cole Harper was not the kind of man who invited conversation about his failures. He was 6 feet and 2 inches of frontier discipline, with hands that had never gone soft, and a jaw that had never gone slack. Not even at his wife's funeral 8 years ago, when half the county came to pay their respects. And he stood at the graveside like a fence post driven into frozen ground, still and upright, and giving nothing away. He had learned that from his father, who had learned it from his father before him, and the Harper men believed that a rancher who showed his pain in public was a rancher who invited wolves to the door. The ranch itself was proof of everything the Harper name was supposed to mean. 4,000 acres in the Montana frontier, spreading across river bottoms and high grass country and timber ridgelines that turned purple at dusk. His grandfather had started with 600 acres and a borrowed plow. His father had doubled it, then doubled it again. Nathan had added the final 1,000 himself, buying out a failing neighbor during a hard winter when other men were too cautious to move. The cattle numbered in the hundreds. The barns were solid. The fences were maintained. The bunkhouse held 12 men who knew their work and did it without being told twice. From the outside, Harper Ranch looked like a monument. Nathan had believed for most of his adult life that monuments did not need inspection. He was wrong. The first sign of Amelia Whitmore's arrival was the sound of a wagon that did not belong on his road. Nathan was in the east pasture checking a section of fence that his foreman had reported as weakened when he heard the wheels on gravel, and something about the rhythm of it made him turn. It was not the rolling weight of a supply wagon. It was something lighter, slower, like something that had traveled a long way and was not entirely sure it had arrived at the right place. He rode back toward the main gate. The wagon was a modest rented rig from town driven by a man from the livery who looked relieved to be stopping. And seated in the back, straight-spined and composed in a dark gray traveling dress, was a woman Nathan had never seen before, holding a worn leather suitcase on her lap and a small notebook pressed against her side like she was afraid someone might try to take it. She was not young, though she was not old. He put her somewhere around 35. She had a wide, soft face, the kind that carried its emotions close to the surface, even when the person behind it was working very hard to keep them controlled. She was a full-figured woman, noticeably so, with the solid presence of someone who had learned to occupy space unapologetically. Her dark eyes moved across the ranch front with a sharpness that he noticed immediately and did not entirely like. She was not looking at his ranch the way visitors usually did. Visitors usually looked at Harper Ranch the way people looked at a cathedral, with a kind of reverent distance, taking in the size of it, the solidity of it impressed before they had even stepped down from the wagon. This woman was looking at it the way an accountant looks at a ledger, like she was already adding things up. "Mr. Harper," she said, and her voice was steady and clear and carried no apology in it whatsoever. "My name is Amelia Whitmore. I was the wife of Douglas Whitmore, who passed this spring. His attorney informs me that my husband held a partial inheritance claim on this property through his mother's line, originating from a land agreement made in 1847. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to understand what I may or may not have a legitimate interest in." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. He had a general policy about people who arrived at his gate claiming interests in his land. That policy was not polite. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I don't know what attorney told you to come out here, but there hasn't been a valid outside claim on this land since my grandfather settled the deed in 1853. Whatever your late husband believed he was entitled to, he was misinformed." "I'm sure that's what you believe," Amelia said pleasantly. "But I have a copy of the 1847 agreement, and I have my husband's attorney's letter, and I would very much appreciate 30 minutes of your time to lay it out on a table before either of us says anything we'll need to take to a judge." Nathan's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being spoken to with that particular combination of politeness and immovability. Most people, when Nathan Harper squared his shoulders and set his expression, found somewhere else to be. This woman sat in the back of a rented wagon and looked at him like she had all afternoon and no particular concerns about his feelings on the matter. "You can have 15 minutes, he said. "Inside." He sent the liveryman back to town with instructions that the woman would arrange her own return transportation when she was ready, then led Amelia Whitmore into the ranch house and poured them both coffee without asking whether she wanted any. She set her suitcase down beside the table, opened it, and produced a folder of documents that she placed in front of him with the efficiency of someone who had already decided how this conversation was going to go. The 1847 agreement was real. Nathan read it twice. His grandfather's handwriting was unmistakable, and the terms were exactly what she said. They were a partial interest in a land parcel that had eventually been absorbed into what was now the western section of Harper Ranch, held in trust through the Whitmore family line, to be assessed upon the death of the primary deed holder. His grandfather had been dead for 22 years. "Nobody ever came forward," Nathan said flatly. "Douglas didn't know about it until his mother passed last year," Amelia said. "I found it in her papers. He died before he could do anything about it." Nathan studied the document another long moment. "What is it you want, Mrs. Whitmore?" "A fair assessment," she said. "I'm not trying to take your ranch. I don't want your ranch. What I want is to understand what this land is worth and what my family's rightful interest in it amounts to. That may result in a payment. It may result in nothing at all, but I won't sign anything releasing a claim I don't fully understand." "That's reasonable," Nathan said, though he did not feel reasonable. He felt the way he always felt when something entered his life that he could not immediately control, like a man standing at the edge of a steep drop in the dark, not sure how far down it went. "There's one other thing," Amelia said. She had picked up her notebook, and her pen was in her hand. "In order to assess the land's fair value, I'll need to review the ranch's financial records and walk the property. All of it." "No?" Nathan said. "Then you'll be talking to my attorney," Amelia said calmly, and she clicked her pen closed. Nathan looked at her. She looked back. She was not bluffing. He could see that. Whatever Douglas Whitmore's widow had been through in the months since her husband died, it had not left her timid. There was something in her eyes that had already been through the worst and come out the other side, and was not particularly impressed by a stubborn rancher with a clenched jaw. "1 week," he said finally. "You can review records and walk the property. You stay in the guest room, you eat at the table with the men, and you don't interfere with the work." "I wouldn't dream of it," Amelia said, and he could not quite tell whether she meant it or whether she was being dry about it, and that uncertainty annoyed him more than almost anything else about the whole exchange. She was settled in the guest room by nightfall. The ranch hands heard about it by morning, and the reaction was exactly what Nathan expected. His foreman, a leathery, capable man named Holt Decker, who had been with Harper Ranch for 16 years, pulled him aside after breakfast with an expression that said he was choosing his words carefully. "Ranch is doing fine," Holt said. "Don't need some widow poking around in the books." "Legal matter," Nathan said. "It'll be handled." "You sure she's just here about the land claim? What else would she be here about?" Holt shrugged, which was his way of saying he had opinions he was keeping to himself, and Nathan let it go because he had more pressing things to manage than his foreman's intuitions. What he did not expect was Amelia. Not the version of her he had imagined when she sat across the table from him with her documents and her steady voice. He had imagined someone who would sit in the house and review papers and ask occasional polite questions, and then present him with a number and leave. He had imagined, if he was honest, that she would be overwhelmed by the scale of the operation and quietly lose confidence in whatever claim she thought she had. He had been wrong about that. She was out at first light. Nathan saw her from the bunkhouse window, already crossing the yard in practical boots that had clearly seen real use before, her notebook open in one hand, moving toward the eastern pastures with the determined stride of someone who knew exactly how much ground she needed to cover and exactly how little time she had. He told himself he wasn't following her. He was doing his morning inspection, which took him the same direction. She was already at the fence line when he caught up, crouched down looking at the grass, and she had her notebook out and was writing something. He looked at what she was looking at. The east pasture grass. He had looked at this pasture 1,000 times. There was nothing wrong with it. "Something catch your interest?" he asked. "The grass is thinner than it should be at this time of year," she said, not looking up. "Has the rotation schedule changed in the last 2 years? Rotation's been the same for 20 years. That might be part of the problem." She stood up, brushed off her knees, and looked out across the pasture with that assessing expression he was already learning to recognize. "If you're rotating the same number of cattle through the same schedule over 20 years, while the herd size has increased, the land isn't recovering fast enough between cycles. You're not overgrazing dramatically, but you're overgrazing slowly, which is harder to notice and worse in the long run." Nathan opened his mouth, closed it, because she was not wrong, and he knew she was not wrong the moment she said it, and the fact that he knew it and had not thought about it in precisely those terms for years was a thing he did not want to examine too closely right now. "I'll take it under advisement," he said. "Of course," she said, and moved on to the next fence section. She walked 6 miles that day. He knew because Holt told him with an expression that suggested he found it mildly alarming. That evening at dinner, she sat at the end of the long table with the ranch hands and ate without complaint and asked careful, specific questions about how the different sections of the ranch operated, and the men who had started the day prepared to be dismissive found themselves answering her without quite meaning to. There was something in the way she listened that made people talk. She gave her full attention without performing it. She wrote things down. She remembered what she had written. Over the next 3 days, she moved through every inch of Harper Ranch. The cattle pens, the storage barns, the water systems, the tool yards. And then she sat down with the financial records. Nathan had given her access grudgingly, watching from across the room, while she sat up at the big oak table in his office and began moving through ledgers with the focus of a woman who had grown up around this kind of work. Her late husband, she had mentioned once without elaborating, had been in land management. She had helped with the books for years. She did not say much while she worked. That, Nathan decided, was the most unsettling thing about her. Most people who were digging through someone's records either talked too much to cover their nerves or went conspicuously silent, in a way that communicated they had found something. Amelia did neither. She worked with a steady, concentrated quiet, making notes, occasionally asking him to clarify a date or a contract term, and then going back to the pages. On the evening of the 4th day, she looked up from the ledgers and said, "Nathan." He had not given her permission to use his first name. He also did not correct her. "I need to show you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it before you decide what you want to do about it." He sat down across from her. She turned the ledger to face him and put her finger on a column of supply contract costs dated 5 years back. "Your supply manager," she said, "Walter Briggs. How long has he been handling contract negotiations?" 12 years, Nathan said. "And in those 12 years, has anyone else reviewed his contracts?" Nathan was very still. "No, I trusted him." "I know you did," Amelia said, and her voice was not unkind. It was very careful in the way that voices are careful when they are about to deliver something that cannot be undelivered. "Nathan, the contracts Walter Briggs has been signing on behalf of this ranch for the past 8 years are overpriced. Not by accident. The pricing on your feed, your equipment maintenance, your fencing materials, every major supply line is running 15 to 22% above market rate. And in at least 3 cases, the supplier names on the contracts don't match any business I can find a legitimate record of. Nathan did not say anything. I think Walter Briggs has been taking a cut, Amelia said. I think he has been arranging contracts with either shell businesses or complicit suppliers and collecting a percentage that never appears in your books because it never hits your accounts. It goes directly to him. The silence in the room had a physical weight. Nathan reached across and pulled the ledger toward him. He read the column she had pointed to. Then the next one. Then he opened the contract binder she slid toward him and read those too. He read for 45 minutes without saying a word. Amelia did not say anything either. She refilled both their coffee cups at some point. She sat and waited with a patience that seemed to come from the same place as everything else about her, something that had been tested severely and had held. When he finally set the last page down, Nathan Harper pressed both hands flat on the table and stared at the wood grain for a long moment. He worked that bunkhouse for 12 years, he said. I know. His boy worked here summers. I know Nathan. He sat at my table. Yes. She waited. Then quietly. The problem is not that someone failed you. People fail each other. The problem is what happens now. Whether you refuse to look at it or whether you decide what to do about it. Nathan's jaw was tight enough that the muscle in his cheek was jumping. Is there more? He asked. Yes, she said. And she told him about the northern pasture, 800 acres in the northern section of the ranch which Nathan had largely written off as unusable. His father had lost 40 head of cattle there in the flood of 1861, when the river that ran through that section had overrun its banks in a spring storm, and the losses had been catastrophic. His father had never run cattle in that section again, and Nathan had inherited that decision, along with the land, and carried it forward without question. The river moved, Amelia said. She opened her notebook and turned it to show him a sketch she had made during her walk of that section. The main channel shifted east sometime in the last 2 decades. I'd estimate it's running 80 yards away from where your father's records indicate it was in 1861. The floodplain that destroyed those cattle doesn't exist in the same location anymore. That northern section is 800 acres of some of the richest grass on this property, Nathan. It's been sitting empty for 30 years because of a decision that stopped being relevant before your father died. Nathan looked at the sketch, at the careful lines she had drawn, the notations about soil quality, the estimates of carrying capacity. My father never went back up there after the flood, he said. I know. He just stopped. Grief does that, Amelia said. It freezes a moment, and then the world keeps moving, and the frozen moment doesn't. You inherited a frozen decision. That's not a failure. Not knowing that it had stopped being true, that's not a character flaw. It just is. The question is, what you do now. Nathan stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, the last light was draining out of the sky over the western range, turning everything the color of old copper, and the land spread out in every direction as far as he could see. 4,000 acres that his blood had built, and his blood had continued. And he had genuinely believed, that keeping it intact meant keeping it unchanged. That honoring his grandfather and his father meant doing what they had done. Holding the lines they had held, trusting the men they had trusted. And the thing that was twisting in his chest right now was not just the betrayal of Walter Briggs, was not just the waste of 800 empty acres, but the slow, sickening recognition that the strength he had always been most proud of, the refusal to question the loyalty to tradition, the certainty that what had always been done was what should always be done, had not been strength at all. It had been fear with the different name. He heard Amelia's chair push back from the table. Her footsteps crossed the floor and stopped a few feet behind him, not close enough to crowd him. Just present the way she had been present this whole week, steady, patient, taking up exactly as much space as was needed, and no more. My father used to say, Nathan said, not turning around, that the mark of a Harper was that we didn't ask for help. What do you think the mark of a Harper should be? Amelia asked. He was quiet for a long moment. I think, he said finally, that my father survived because he adapted when he had to. I think I told myself I was honoring him by not changing. And I think I've been wrong about that for a long time. He turned around. Amelia Whitmore stood in the middle of his office in her practical boots, with her notebook under her arm, and her dark eyes steady on his face, and she looked like the most unsentimental woman he had ever met, and also, somehow, the most compassionate. And Nathan Harper, who had not asked anyone for anything in 30 years, heard himself say, "Will you help me figure out how to fix this?" Amelia held his gaze. "I'll do better than that," she said. "I'll help you figure out how to build something that lasts." Outside, the copper light over the western range turned to dark, and 4,000 acres of Harper land stretched silent in every direction, waiting patient, as the earth always is, for the people standing on it to finally decide what they were going to do. The morning after Nathan Harper asked Amelia Whitmore for help, Walter Briggs walked into the ranch house kitchen at 6:15 like he had done every morning for 12 years, poured himself a cup of coffee from the stove and said, "Boss, we got a fence situation on the southern line that needs your eye today." Nathan was sitting at the kitchen table. He did not look up from his coffee right away. When he did, his expression was so controlled, so deliberately ordinary, that a man who didn't know him would have seen nothing unusual in it at all. Walter Briggs was not that kind of man. He had worked alongside Nathan Harper for 12 years. He knew every variation of that face. Something passed through Walter's eyes. Fast. Gone before it fully formed. "I'll take a look this afternoon," Nathan said. "Sit down and eat." Walter sat. He ate. He talked about the southern fence the way a man talks when he is filling silence he does not like. Nathan answered in the right places and said nothing that mattered, and across the table, Holt Decker watched both of them with the quiet attentiveness of a man who has spent his life reading weather. Amelia did not come to breakfast that morning. She was already in the office. Nathan had found her there when he came down before dawn. The lamp lit the ledgers open, her notebook filled with columns of figures he hadn't seen her compile the night before. She had her sleeves pushed up, and there was an ink smudge on her left hand, and she looked like a woman who had not slept much, which she probably hadn't. "You should eat something," he'd said from the doorway. "I will," she said without looking up. "I want to finish this before I lose the thread." He had left her to it. Now sitting across from Walter Briggs and watching the man eat his eggs and talk about a fence line that may or may not have actually needed attention, Nathan felt something he was not accustomed to feeling. The slow, nauseating patience of a man who knows the truth and cannot yet say it out loud. Who has to wait? Who has to be certain before he moves, because a mistake here would cost more than the damage already done. He had spent most of the night sitting on the edge of his bed staring at the floor, going back through 12 years in his memory. 12 years of Walter handling supply contracts. 12 years of Walter sitting at this table talking about the work, drinking his coffee, seeming as solid and reliable as the fence posts he helped maintain. He had trusted that man, not casually, not superficially, deeply. The way you trust someone who shows up every day and does the work and never gives you a reason to look twice. That was the particular cruelty of it. Not the money, though the money was real and significant. Not even the betrayal itself. It was the specific texture of how it had been done, the slow, patient, invisible way Walter had used Nathan's own trust as the instrument. Nathan had never looked twice, because Walter had never once made him want to. That was the skill in it. That was the thing that stayed with Nathan through the sleepless hours of that night like a bone that had been set wrong. He had thought of himself as a man who knew his land, his cattle, his people. He had been wrong about one of those three. After breakfast, Walter headed out toward the southern pasture, and Holt lingered at the coffee stove with the expression of a man who had decided he was going to say something whether he was invited to or not. "You find something in those books," Holt said. Nathan looked at him. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you've got the face you had when you found out your bay mare was sick that winter. Like you already know it's bad, and you're working out how bad before you let yourself feel it." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Whitmore is thorough, he said finally. Is that good or bad? Both, Nathan said. Depending on what you do with it. Holt set his cup down. He was not a man who elaborated, but the look he gave Nathan said clearly that he was available if Nathan wanted to talk further, and that he would not push if Nathan didn't, and that whatever it was, he was in Nathan's corner. Had been for 16 years. Nathan nodded once. That was enough between them. He went back to the office. Amelia had breakfast things on the corner of the desk, now a plate someone had brought her half-eaten, pushed aside. She had spread 3 different sets of ledgers across the oak table and arranged her notes in a sequence that made sense to her in a way Nathan could not immediately follow, but sensed had its own rigorous logic. "Tell me what you're building," he said. She looked up. Her eyes were tired but focused in the way of a person who runs on the specific energy of a problem that hasn't been solved yet. "A complete picture," she said. "Not just the supply contracts, the whole financial structure of the ranch for the last 10 years. I want to know every point where money moved in a way that didn't have to be reviewed by anyone but Walter." "That's going to take more than a morning." "I know, sit down. I want to show you what I have so far, and I want you to tell me where the gaps are, because you know this operation, and I don't not completely, and the gaps are where the rest of it is hiding." He sat down. They worked through the morning together, and it was unlike anything Nathan had experienced in 30 years of running the ranch. Not because of what they found, though what they found was significant. It was the working itself. The way Amelia asked questions, sharp and specific, never wasted, always aimed at something she was trying to triangulate from a different angle. The way she listened when he answered, actually listened, processing it against something she already knew, rather than just waiting for him to finish. The way she pushed back when she thought he was rationalizing, which was not infrequently, and the way she did it without contempt, just with the steady insistence of someone who needed the truth and had no patience for anything softer. Nobody had worked alongside Nathan Harper like this. His wife, God rest her, had stayed clear of the business end of things by mutual agreement. She had been the warmth of the house, the steadiness of home, and he had been the one who carried the operational weight. And that division had suited them both. His foremen over the years had been skilled, reliable, loyal men who knew ranching, but who operated in a hierarchy where Nathan's word was the ceiling. Even Holt, whom Nathan respected as much as any man alive, deferred to him in a way that meant Nathan almost never had his thinking genuinely challenged. Amelia Whitmore had been on his property for 5 days and had already challenged his thinking more than anyone had in the previous decade. It was deeply uncomfortable. It was also he was beginning to understand exactly what had been missing. By mid-morning, she found the second thread. She had been working through equipment maintenance contracts, a category Nathan had always considered mundane enough not to scrutinize when she went still in the particular way. She went still when something caught like a current changing direction. "Nathan," she said, "I see it." He said, though he didn't yet. He leaned over. She pointed to a maintenance contract for the hay press equipment dated 3 years back. The supplier listed was a company called Ridgeline Agricultural Services, based out of Billings. The contract price was more than twice what Nathan would have expected for that service. "I pulled every Ridgeline contract in your files," Amelia said. "There are 9 of them across 3 years, all above market, and I can't find a business registration for Ridgeline Agricultural Services in Billings, Helena, or anywhere else in Montana." Nathan straightened up. "It doesn't exist," he said. "Not officially. Which means the money paid under those contracts went somewhere, and it wasn't to a legitimate service provider." There was a sound from the hallway. Both of them looked at the office door. It was open 2 inches. Nathan stood up and covered the distance in 4 strides and pulled the door open, and the hallway was empty. But the floorboard at the end nearest the kitchen was still settling, the faint creak of recent weight fading as he stood there. Someone had been standing at that door. He did not know how long. He closed the office door and turned the key in the lock, and when he came back to the table, Amelia was watching him with an expression that had sharpened considerably. "How many people have access to this house?" she said quietly. "All the senior hands." Walter has a key. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the ledgers and said equally quietly, "We need to work faster." That changed the tempo of everything. What had been methodical became urgent. They moved through the remaining records with the focused speed of people who had just understood that the clock was running. Amelia pulled contracts. Nathan identified inconsistencies he knew from operational experience costs that were wrong not just on paper, but in his gut charges for work. He now realized, thinking back, he had never actually seen evidence of being done. 3 hours of that, the two of them working across the table with barely a word exchanged, that wasn't directly relevant to what they were finding, and by early afternoon, the shape of what Walter Briggs had done was laid out in front of them in cold arithmetic. It was larger than Nathan had allowed himself to believe the night before. Over 8 years through inflated contracts, fictitious suppliers, and service charges for work, either not performed or performed at a fraction of the billed cost. Walter Briggs had redirected an amount that made Nathan's stomach drop when Amelia wrote the total at the bottom of her notebook page and turned it toward him. He looked at the number. He stood up and walked to the window and put his hand on the wall. "He took that," Nathan said, "over 8 years, while he ate at my table." "Yes, while his boy was working my summer seasons." "Nathan, I paid his boy fair wages," Nathan said, and his voice had something in it that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but was the particular rawness of a man whose loyalty has been turned against him. "I thought I was helping a family, the whole time." "The whole time Walter was counting on exactly that," Amelia said. She did not say it cruelly. She said it the way a doctor states a diagnosis because the truth is not improved by being softened past the point of recognition. "He used your decency. That's on him, Nathan, not on you. It's on me that I never looked." "Yes," she said simply. "That part is on you, but it ends now." He turned around. She was watching him with those steady dark eyes, and he understood in that moment that this was what she did not just with numbers, but with people. She looked at the full truth of a thing without flinching and without either exaggerating it or diminishing it, and she sat in that truth until the person across from her could sit in it too. It was one of the most discomforting things about her. It was also, he thought, the most valuable. "What do I do?" he said. "First, you stop giving Walter access to anything he doesn't already have. You don't confront him yet. Not until we have a complete record that an attorney can use." "You think I need an attorney?" "I think you need an attorney, a new supply manager, and about 2 weeks of very careful accounting work before you make any move that tips Walter off. If he knows you know, and he has records of his own, he's keeping somewhere he disappears with them, and you're left with a civil case that costs more to pursue than you'll recover." Nathan absorbed this. "You sound like you've done this before," he said. Something moved across Amelia's face. Not quite pain. More like the shadow of a memory that she had made her peace with, but that still had weight. "My husband's business partner," she said. "Different industry, same pattern. Douglas and I discovered it 18 months before he died. We went through exactly this process." She paused. "We won, but it cost us 2 years." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what that cost you." "I know how to do it now," she said, which was not quite accepting the condolence, but was not rejecting it either. That's worth something. She was right. They decided to say nothing about Walter to carry on as though the morning had produced nothing of particular note, and Nathan went through the remainder of that day with the performance required of a man who knows something he cannot yet act on. He spoke to Walter at the southern fence. He agreed with Walter's assessment of the fence situation. He even agreed when Walter recommended a supplier for fencing materials, knowing as he did so exactly what he now knew about Walter's supplier recommendations, and he noted the name of the supplier in his memory to give to Amelia later, and said nothing more than, "I'll think on it." It was the hardest acting he had ever done. Dinner that evening was its own particular tension. Walter at one end of the long table, Amelia in her usual place, the ranch hands filling the space between, with the noise of men ending a long day. Nathan sat at the head and watched the two of them and thought about what it meant that these two people occupied the same table and only one of them knew what the other had done. He noticed for the first time that Walter watched Amelia. Not obviously. Not in a way the other men would clock. But Nathan was watching for it now, and he saw the way Walter's eyes went to her every time she spoke, assessing, calculating the specific focus of a man, measuring how much someone else knows. After dinner, when the hands had dispersed and Walter had gone to the bunkhouse, Amelia appeared at the office door and said quietly, "He knows we found something." "I think so too," Nathan said. "Then we have less time than I thought." She came into the room and sat down. "I need you to send someone reliable to Helena tomorrow. Someone Walter won't think twice about you sending. I need them to pull business registration records on 6 company names." She handed him a list. "And I need you to write to your attorney tonight." "I can send Holt," Nathan said. "Does Walter trust Holt?" "Walter's never had a reason not to." "Good. Send him first thing." Nathan looked at the list of company names she had given him. Ridgeline Agricultural Services was there. 5 others he didn't recognize, names that had appeared on contracts he had signed over the years and never questioned because Walter had always had a plausible explanation for why they were getting the best available deal. "How do you move through the world the way you do?" he said. Amelia looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You walk onto a stranger's ranch. You sit down with a stranger's books. You find something most people wouldn't have found, and you handle it with more—" he searched for the word, "more composure than I've managed to handle it with, and I've been here 30 years. She was quiet for a moment. "After Douglas died," she said, "I had about 3 weeks of being completely unable to function. I couldn't eat a full meal, couldn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. I sat in our house and I felt like the floor had dropped out from under everything." She folded her hands on the desk, steady and deliberate. "And then I had to deal with the estate, the debt his business partner had hidden, the creditors, the attorneys, all of it at once while I was still in the middle of grieving." She paused. "You don't get to fall apart when there's something that has to be done. You just don't. So you put the falling apart somewhere to the side, and you do the thing that has to be done, and you deal with the rest later." "What happens later?" Nathan asked. He was not sure why he asked it. It came out before he decided to say it. Amelia looked at him steadily. "You find somewhere quiet," she said, "and you let yourself feel it. All of it. Every bit you set aside. And it's terrible, and it's necessary, and you come out the other side." She paused. "I'm still coming out the other side, if I'm honest." "I know something about that," Nathan said. "Not the same, but something like it." She nodded once. She understood what he meant without him having to detail it. They sat in the office for another hour, writing letters, making lists, building the orderly documented case that would eventually be handed to an attorney, and if necessary, a judge. Amelia was precise and thorough, and Nathan was honest in a way he had not been accustomed to being with anyone about the operational details of the ranch, laying out the structure, clearly including the decisions he was not proud of in retrospect, and she received all of it without judgment, using it to build a clearer picture. At some point past 10 o'clock he realized that the lamp was burning low, and they had been working together in this room for most of the day, and he felt less alone than he had felt since his wife died. He did not say that. He was not ready to say that. But he noted it with a kind of careful private acknowledgement, the way you note a change in the weather before you fully trust that it's going to hold. The next morning Holt left for Helena before the rest of the ranch was moving, carrying a letter to Nathan's attorney and the list of company names Amelia had compiled, and Nathan told Walter, who asked that Holt was handling a procurement matter in the city, which was true enough not to be a lie, and vague enough not to be useful. Walter said, "Nothing I could handle for you." "Already sent," Nathan said. Walter nodded and drank his coffee. Nathan watched the line of Walter's jaw and kept his own expression flat. That day, Amelia asked to see the northern pasture. Nathan took her himself, saddling 2 horses without explanation to anyone who was watching, and they rode the 4 miles to the northern section through the high summer grass, and Amelia was quiet on the ride in a way that felt like thinking rather than absence. When they got there, she dismounted and walked the section in a wide circuit, and Nathan rode alongside her at a walking pace, watching her work. She was testing the soil with her boot heel, checking the grass growth, looking at the line of trees that marked where the river now ran. And she moved with the same focused competence she brought to everything, thorough and unbothered by the heat or the distance. "Your father lost 40 head here," she said. Not a question. She had read it in the records. In the spring of 1861, river flooded inside of 2 hours, worst spring in 20 years. And he never came back. He came back once about a year after. Rode through with me when I was about 8 years old. He didn't say anything. We just rode through and then we rode home. Did he ever explain why he stopped running cattle here? He didn't have to, Nathan said. I understood. Amelia stopped walking. She turned and looked at him, shielding her eyes against the angle of the sun. What did you understand? She asked. That some losses stay with you, Nathan said. That some places carry what happened in them. Yes, she said. That's true. And also, she turned and looked out across the 800 acres of empty, rich, unharvested grass. This land doesn't know about the flood. It doesn't carry what happened. It just grew. For 30 years it just grew while your father's grief sat on the fence line and kept it empty. She turned back to him. Your father's pain was real. I'm not arguing with that. But his pain made a decision, and then his pain died with him, and the decision stayed. Nathan looked out at the pasture. The grass was long and thick, and a deep, healthy green, and he could see without needing her to tell him that it was exactly what she said. It was 800 acres of carrying capacity that his ranch had been missing for 30 years because a dead man's worst day had never been questioned. What would it take to bring it back into rotation? He asked. A few weeks of preparation, proper fencing checks along the river boundary, and the willingness to try. She looked at him directly. Which is the harder part? The fencing I can do in a week, Nathan said. I know, she said. I'm not talking about the fencing. He held her gaze. She was not unkind about it. She never was. But she was relentlessly clear, and the clarity he was finding was its own particular form of respect. She did not soften things because she did not think he needed them softened. That was not what he had expected from her. He was not sure what he had expected exactly when the widow with the suitcase had stepped out of the livery wagon at his gate, but it had not been this. They rode back in the late afternoon, and Amelia told him what she thought the restoration of the northern pasture would add to the ranch's annual carrying capacity, and Nathan ran the numbers in his head while she talked and felt for the first time in longer than he could precisely name something that was cautiously close to hope. That evening, one of the younger ranch hands, a 22-year-old named Cord Willis, who had been with the outfit for 2 seasons and had the cheerful lack of tact common to young men who haven't yet learned which thoughts to keep to themselves, said to Amelia at dinner, "You know more about this ranch than half the men working it." Amelia took a bite of biscuit. "That's because I asked questions," she said. "Most folks come out here to look at land, they don't ask much." "Most folks come out here to be impressed," she said. "I came out here to understand. Those are different things." Cord thought about this with the visible effort of someone genuinely chewing on an idea. "Yes, ma'am," he said finally. "Reckon they are." Across the table, Nathan caught Holt's eye. Holt had the expression of a man who had just updated his assessment of a situation he had previously thought he understood. Nathan looked back at his plate. The letters from Helena came back 2 days later. Holt rode in with them mid-morning, slightly trail-dusty, and with the look of a man who had accomplished his mission and was ready to report. He handed Nathan the attorney's response and the records packet in the front hallway, and Nathan took them directly to the office, where Amelia was waiting, and she opened the records packet first, which was the correct order of priorities. Of the 6 company names on her list, 2 were legitimate businesses operating in Montana. 4 were not. Of those 4, 2 shared a registered agent. a name that did not appear anywhere in Nathan's records or ranch operations, but that Amelia stared at for a long moment before picking up her pen and writing it down with the particular deliberateness of someone who has just connected a thread they have been looking for. "Do you know this name?" she said, turning the page toward Nathan. He looked at it. He did not recognize it. She wrote 2 other names beside it and showed him those. Still nothing. "Give me an hour," she said. He went out to the yard because he needed to move and occupied himself with things that needed doing, which on a working ranch was never difficult. He fixed a sticking door on the equipment barn. He checked in with 2 of the hands about a section of irrigation work that was scheduled for the end of the week. He did all of it on the surface of his attention, while underneath the machinery of what he and Amelia had uncovered was running continuously, assembling and reassembling itself, showing him new angles he hadn't seen before. When she came to find him an hour later, she had her notebook, and her expression had the charged quality it got when she had found the last piece of something. "The registered agent on those 4 shell companies," she said without preamble, "is Walter Briggs's brother-in-law. He lives in Wyoming. His name appears in 2 property deeds filed in Billings in the last 4 years, both of which were paid in cash." Nathan stood very still. "He built an entire structure," Nathan said. "He was careful," Amelia said. "He didn't take from one place. He spread it across a dozen contract lines over 8 years, each one small enough to look like ordinary variants. He used family he could trust to receive the money and move it into real assets. He had thought it through. Which means he'd been planning it a long time." "Yes." Nathan took off his hat and ran his hand through his hair and put his hat back on, which was the most externally visible sign of agitation he generally permitted himself. "I want him off my land," Nathan said. "I know, and he will be, but not yet, Nathan." She waited until he was looking directly at her. "The attorney's letter. Read it tonight. There's a path here. There's a real documentable legal path, but it requires patience for about 2 more weeks. After that, Walter Briggs will not only be off your land, he will answer for it." Nathan looked at her. He thought about the 12 years, the table, the boy working summers, the steady, patient, invisible theft carried out under the cover of trust. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks. He nodded once. She started to turn away. "Amelia," he said. She stopped. "The land claim," he said. "Your husband's inheritance claim. Whatever that assessment comes to, I intend to be fair about it. I want you to know that." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. She said it simply, without drama, without elaboration, and it landed with the specific weight of something true, that somewhere in the last week, without either of them announcing it, the nature of why she was on this ranch had shifted into something neither of them had a clear name for yet, and both of them were aware of it, and neither of them was ready to speak to it directly. She went back to the house. Nathan stood in the yard with the afternoon sun on his shoulders and 4,000 acres of his grandfather's land around him, and he understood standing there that the ranch he was going to build from this point forward was going to be a different thing than what he had been defending. It was going to be better, and it was going to take exactly the kind of help he had never known how to ask for until a widow with a suitcase had declined to be impressed by his gait. The 2 weeks Nathan had promised Amelia felt like 2 months. Every morning, Walter Briggs walked into that kitchen, poured his coffee, made his small talk, reported on the ranch work with the ease of a man who had nothing to hide. And every morning, Nathan looked at him across the table and performed the same careful neutrality that was costing him more each day to maintain. It was like holding a dam together with your bare hands and being told you had to keep smiling while you did it, Holt noticed. On the 4th morning of the 2-week wait, Holt fell into step beside Nathan on the way out to the east pasture and said quietly, without looking at him, "You're going to tip your hand if you keep looking at him like that." "Like what?" Nathan said. "Like he's already standing in front of a judge." Nathan said nothing. "I don't know exactly what you found," Holt said. "I got enough of a picture from what I pulled in Helena to have my own ideas. But whatever it is you need, 3 more days, not 3 more minutes, so you might want to find something to look angry about that isn't Walter." "Any suggestions?" "The east fence. I'll tell you, the posts need resetting." You argue with me about the method, we'll spend the whole morning at it, and you'll have something legitimate to chew on. Nathan looked at him sidelong. 16 years, he said. Yes, sir, Holt said. You ever think about leaving? Holt thought about it genuinely, which Nathan appreciated. Once, he said. About 8 years back, had an offer from a spread outside of Billings, good money. He paused. Stayed because this place is worth staying for. Still is. Even with... He let that part go unfinished. Even with... They spent the morning on the east fence. It was not wasted time. The posts did need attention. Holt had been correct about that, even using it as cover, and the physical work had the quality it always had for Nathan. When his mind was running hot, it gave his hands something real to do, while the rest of him churned through what couldn't yet be spoken. He drove fence posts, with the methodical force of a man processing a season's worth of contained anger, through the work itself. And by noon, he felt, if not calmer, at least more contained. Amelia appeared at the fence line around 11, with 2 canteens handed, one to Nathan and one to Holt without ceremony, and said to Nathan, "The attorney wrote back. Can you come up to the house when you have a break?" "Go," Holt said. Nathan went. The attorney's second letter was longer than the first. Nathan read it twice standing at the office desk, while Amelia sat across from him and waited. The substance of it was this: the documented evidence Amelia had compiled was sufficient to pursue both a civil recovery action and to refer the matter to the county sheriff's office for criminal investigation. The attorney's recommendation was to do both: simultaneously file the civil claim to begin the recovery process and report to the sheriff so that Walter's assets could be frozen before he had the opportunity to move or conceal what remained of the money. The timeline for initiating both actions was 10 days. 10 more days of breakfast across the table from Walter Briggs. "I can do 10 days, Nathan said. "I know you can," Amelia said. He set the letter down. "There's a section in there about the land claim," he said. "Your husband's claim." I read it. The attorney says the 1847 agreement is valid, but that the valuation of the relevant parcel, given how it's been integrated into the ranch's current operations over the past 70 years, would likely result in a relatively modest settlement. He thinks a court would award something in the range of... "I know what the range is," Amelia said. "I read the letter. I want to discuss it." She looked at him carefully. "Why?" "Because the legal number and the fair number might not be the same thing, and I want to know which one you're expecting." Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not surprise exactly. More like the careful reorientation of someone who has been prepared for a different kind of conversation. "I came here for a fair accounting," she said. "Not to take more than what's right." "Then let me make you a counter-proposal," Nathan said. He sat down. "The attorney's range is based on the parcel value in isolation. But what you've found in these books, what you've laid out for me, the supply contracts, the northern pasture, the restructuring, we're going to do the work you've done here, has a value that's considerably larger than the legal settlement on that 1847 claim. I want to compensate you fairly for both." Amelia was quiet. "I'm not your employee," she said. "No," he agreed. "You're not. That's not what I'm proposing." She looked at him steadily, waiting. "I'm proposing," Nathan said, choosing his words with care, "that when this is over, when Walter is dealt with and the ranch is restructured, I would like you to stay on in a formal capacity. As a partner. In the business side of things. The accounts, the contracts, the financial management, with a proper agreement and a proper share." The silence in the room had a particular quality to it. "That's not a small offer," Amelia said. "No, ma'am, it isn't." "You've known me 11 days. "I know," he said. "I also know what 12 years of misplaced trust cost me, and I know what 11 days of your work has been worth. I reckon I'm a better judge of people than I was 2 weeks ago." She almost smiled at that. "Let me think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." They went back to work. Those 10 days had their own rhythm. The controlled normalcy of days, When nothing could be said openly, the quiet industry of Amelia continuing to organize and document Nathan managing the ranch with the particular focus of a man redirecting his tension into productivity. The northern pasture fencing was checked and reinforced by a small crew Nathan trusted. Amelia drafted a proposed new rotation schedule that she and Nathan reviewed together in the evenings. He began making quiet inquiries through Holt and through his attorney about legitimate supply alternatives, groundwork laid carefully so that when the time came to rebuild those contract relationships, he would not be starting from zero. Walter, for his part, grew quieter. Not dramatically. Not in any way that could be named outright. But Nathan, watching now with the specific attention of a man who understood what he was watching, could see the subtle signs of a person recalibrating. Walter checked things he didn't usually check. He asked questions about the Helena trip that he framed as casual and were not. He was, Nathan understood, conducting his own quiet investigation into how much the widow had found. On the 7th day, something happened that Nathan had not anticipated. He was in the barn, checking one of the horses when he heard voices from the adjacent equipment bay, the half-wall partition between them thin enough that sound carried freely. Walter Briggs and Cord Willis, the young hand. "Widow still staying up at the house," Walter said. His voice had the practiced casualness of someone who didn't want the question to sound like what it was. "Far as I know," Cord said, "she been in the books this whole time." A pause. Cord was not a sophisticated young man, but he was not foolish either, and something in Walter's tone had apparently landed wrong with him. "Reckon that's between her and the boss," Cord said. "Just asking." "Yes, sir," Cord said, and his voice had gone flat in the way of a 22-year-old who has decided a conversation is over. Nathan heard Walter's footsteps move away. He stood very still in the barn for a moment. Then he went and found Cord. "You know if I should be worried about anything?" Cord said when Nathan appeared in the equipment bay with the direct expression that on Harper Ranch meant something specific. "I need you to do something for me," Nathan said. "And I need it kept between us." Cord stood up straight. "Yes, sir. If Walter asks you anything else about Mrs. Whitmore or the books or what goes on in the house, you come to me directly. Don't answer him. Don't make a thing of it. Just come find me." Cord looked at him with the wide, clear-eyed attention of a young man who had just been trusted with something that mattered. "Yes, sir," he said. "I can do that." Nathan went back to the house and told Amelia. She did not look surprised. "He's getting nervous," she said. "That means he's considering his options." "Which are, in rough order of likelihood, approach you directly with some version of a story about how the accounts aren't what they look like or disappear before you can make a move, or—" She paused. "Or do something that creates enough confusion and disruption that any legal action becomes messy and contested." "What does that last one look like?" Amelia looked at him carefully. "It could look like several things. One of which is making a claim against you first, alleging something that would muddy the water." Nathan stared at her. "He's got nothing to claim against me. He doesn't need to have a real claim. He needs to have a claim that costs you time and money to fight while he uses that time to move assets." She folded her hands on the desk. "Nathan, I want to move up the timeline. I want to get the filing and the sheriff's report done in the next 3 days, instead of the next 3. "I thought you said 10 days. "I said what I thought then. What I know now is that Walter is actively assessing the situation, and the window for us to move before he does is shrinking." She met his eyes. "Do you trust me?" The question sat between them for a half-second. "Yes," Nathan said. Without any hesitation at all, which surprised him slightly, and from the small change in her expression surprised her too. "Then send for your attorney tomorrow morning. Tell him to be here in 2 days." Nathan sent for the attorney that afternoon. The man arrived 48 hours later, a precise and weathered lawyer named Garrett Allard, who had handled Nathan's legal matters for years and who read Amelia's compiled documentation with the expression of a man encountering work considerably more thorough than he had expected. He asked her several sharp technical questions. She answered all of them. He asked a follow-up on one answer. She had the supporting page ready before he finished the question. Garrett Allard looked at Nathan over his glasses. "This," he said, "is a complete record." "Mrs. Whitmore is thorough," Nathan said. "I can see that." He turned back to Amelia. "Where did you learn to do this?" "Necessity," she said. Garrett almost smiled. "It usually does the best teaching." He gathered the documents into a careful order. "I'll file the civil action today. I'll have the materials to the sheriff's office before nightfall. By tomorrow morning, Walter Briggs will find that his ability to move money has become significantly impaired." Nathan looked at Amelia. She exhaled very slowly, and he understood that she had been carrying a level of sustained, controlled tension that she had not been allowing to show, and that something in her had just released a fraction of it. "Thank you," he said, to Garrett, and then to Amelia more quietly. "Both of you." The next morning, the sheriff's deputy arrived at Harper Ranch at 7:45. Nathan was at the barn. He had timed it that way deliberately so he would not have to watch Walter's face when the deputy arrived. He was not sure he could maintain an appropriate expression while watching Walter understand what had happened, and he had enough to manage without adding that. Holt came to find him 20 minutes later. "Walter's gone to the main house with the deputy," Holt said. "His face when he saw that badge." He stopped. "I don't have words for it, boss. He knew. The second he saw that badge, he knew, and he had the look of a man watching the whole structure come down." Nathan drove a length of fence post into the ground with one hard stroke. "Good," he said. "You all right?" "I will be," Nathan said. "Let me finish this section." He drove 3 more posts before he trusted himself to go back to the house. By the time he got there, the deputy had Walter's statement and had served the civil papers and had explained with the patience of official process what the freezing of assets meant and what Walter's legal obligations now were. Walter was sitting at the kitchen table, and he looked, Nathan thought, not like a man who had been caught so much as like a man who had been very tired for a very long time and had just been told he could stop running. That was the thing Nathan had not expected. Not defiance, not scrambling. A strange collapsed quiet, like a clock that had finally run down. "I'm sorry, Nathan," Walter said. Nathan looked at him for a long moment. "I know you are," he said. "That doesn't fix it." "No," Walter said. "It doesn't." The deputy took Walter's formal statement, which contained somewhat to Nathan's and Garrett Allard's legal benefit, considerably more than a minimum response. Walter, apparently having already spent considerable time in the private accounting of his own actions, gave a thorough account of the scheme. The shell companies, the years of it, with the exhausted precision of a man who had been carrying it alone, and found it a relief to put down, even under these circumstances. Garrett Allard, reviewing the statement that evening, told Nathan it was about the most useful thing that could have happened from a recovery standpoint. "How much will we get back?" Nathan asked. "Not all of it," Garrett said, "but a meaningful portion. The Wyoming property is in his brother-in-law's name, but the funding trail is documented well enough that we have a reasonable claim. Criminal charges are likely, which may result in restitution as part of sentencing." He paused. "You did everything right. The documentation is why." He looked at Amelia when he said that. Amelia received it without performance, just a nod that acknowledged the fact and moved on, which was exactly how she received everything. After Garrett left, Nathan and Amelia sat in the office in the quiet that follows the conclusion of something large, the particular stillness of people who have been moving hard toward a fixed point and have now arrived at it and need a moment before they can determine what comes next. "It's done," Nathan said. "This part is," Amelia said. "What comes next is better," he said. "I'm looking forward to better." She looked at him. "I thought about your proposal," she said. He waited. "The terms would need to be clearly defined," she said. "In writing. Specific responsibilities, specific share. Not a vague arrangement." "Of course," he said. "And I'd want involvement in the restructuring from the start, not brought in after decisions are made. "I'd want that too," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I haven't had a place that was mine since Douglas died," she said. "Not as complaint, more as honest accounting of a fact. I've had places I stayed, things I managed. I haven't had a place." Nathan understood exactly what she was saying, and exactly what weight it carried. "This ranch," he said carefully, "is going to need to become something different than what it's been, and I'm going to need help making it that. Real help from someone who isn't going to tell me what I want to hear." He paused. "I haven't met anyone in 30 years who is less inclined to tell me what I want to hear than you are." Something shifted in her expression. The closest she came to open warmth was this: a slight softening around the eyes, a quality of being seen and not minding it for once. "That is possibly the most unusual compliment I have ever received," she said. "I mean it as one," he said. She was quiet for another moment. Then, "All right," she said. "Yes, we draw up a formal agreement with Garrett and I stay." Nathan nodded once. The decision sat between them, solid and real as a fence post driven into good ground, and both of them knew it was more than a business arrangement, though neither of them said so, and neither of them needed to. Outside the ranch was settling into the deep quiet of a Montana evening, and somewhere out there, 800 acres of northern pasture were standing ready, patient and full of grass that had been growing unharvested for 30 years, waiting for someone to finally decide to use it. The hardest part was over. What came next was going to require just as much courage. But for the first time, in a very long time, Nathan Harper was not facing it alone. The formal agreement between Nathan Harper and Amelia Whitmore was drawn up by Garrett Allard on a Tuesday morning, signed by both parties before noon, and witnessed by Holt Decker, who read it twice before putting his name on it, and then shook Amelia's hand with the specific gravity of a man who was expressing something he did not have words for. "Welcome to Harper Ranch," Holt said. "Thank you, Holt," Amelia said. "Ma'am," he said, and tipped his hat and went back to work. That was Holt's version of a speech. Amelia understood it perfectly. The agreement gave her formal authority over the financial management of the ranch, a defined partnership share in net operating profits, and joint approval rights on any contract above a threshold value that she and Nathan had negotiated for 45 minutes before landing on a number they both found reasonable. Nathan had wanted the threshold higher. Amelia had wanted it lower. They had met in the middle, which was, she reflected, probably going to be the pattern of how they operated, and which she did not find disagreeable. What neither of them had anticipated was how the rest of the county was going to respond. The news about Walter Briggs did not stay quiet. It never did in places like this. A ranching community in the Montana frontier was not a place where a man got served civil papers and had the sheriff's deputy at his door without every neighboring spread knowing the shape of it within a week. Nathan had not tried to contain it, understanding that containment was both impossible and counterproductive. What he had done instead, on Amelia's counsel, was be straightforward about the broad facts. When neighbors asked, there had been financial misconduct by a trusted employee. It had been discovered, legal action was underway, and the ranch was being restructured. What he had not anticipated was how people would receive that. He had expected judgment. The frontier had a long tradition of a certain kind of judgment, the quiet withdrawal of respect from a man who had been fooled, the subtle reclassification of a rancher who had let something happen on his watch into a man who could not be entirely trusted to manage his own affairs. Nathan had steeled himself for that, had decided he would weather it because there was no alternative. What he got instead was something considerably more complicated. The first to come was Amos Pritchard, who ran a smaller outfit 6 miles to the east, and who had been a cordial but not close neighbor for 20 years. Amos rode in on a Thursday morning and asked for Nathan directly, and stood in the yard with his hat in his hands and said, "I got to tell you something. I probably should have told you 3 years ago, and I'm sorry I didn't." Nathan waited. "Walter Briggs came to me," Amos said, "about 3 years back. Said he was looking at some supply arrangements for a few of the spreads in the area, said he could get better pricing through some consolidated contracts. I said I wasn't interested in involving someone else in my supply chain. He moved on. Amos turned his hat brim through his fingers. I didn't think much of it. Didn't think it was my business to mention to you. I'm thinking now maybe it was. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you say anything at the time? Didn't want to stick my nose in, Amos said. Figured if it was your man, it was your business. Figured you knew what he was about. He looked up. I was wrong to figure that. I should have said something and I didn't, and I'm sorry for it. It was, Nathan thought, one of the more honest things a man had said to him in recent memory. I appreciate you coming, Nathan said. What can I do to help? Amos asked. And I'm not asking that as a courtesy. I'm asking it straight. Nathan looked at him. Come inside, he said. There's someone I want you to meet. He introduced Amos Pritchard to Amelia Whitmore and watched the specific recalibration that happened in Amos's expression when he shook her hand and understood within about 3 minutes of conversation that the widow who had apparently uncovered the fraud was also apparently now a formal partner in Harper Ranch, and was the reason the documentation was solid enough to put Walter in front of a judge. Ma'am, Amos said with a respect in his voice that had adjusted considerably upward from his initial greeting. It's a real pleasure. The pleasure's mine, Mr. Pritchard, Amelia said. Sit down. I'd like to talk to you about what consolidated supply contracts could look like when they're run honestly. Amos Pritchard sat down. He stayed for 2 hours. He left with a preliminary conversation about a cooperative purchasing arrangement that Amelia had sketched out in her notebook while they talked, something that could potentially benefit 3 or 4 ranches in the area by pooling legitimate purchasing power with verified suppliers, and that had absolutely nothing to do with shell companies or invisible kickbacks. After he left, Nathan stood in the office doorway and looked at Amelia, who was reviewing her notes from the conversation with the focused expression of someone already moving the idea to the next stage. You walked in here 2 weeks ago with a land claim, he said. I know, she said without looking up. Now you're restructuring regional supply chains. She looked up then. Do you object? She said. No, he said. I'm just noting the trajectory. The almost smile again, brief and real. The supply arrangement makes sense, she said. Walter's scheme worked partly because individual ranchers weren't talking to each other about what they were paying. If they had been, somebody would have noticed the pricing discrepancy years earlier. She tapped her notebook. Transparency between neighbors is a protection. It doesn't cost anything. Some men in this county would push back on that, Nathan said. They don't like talking numbers with their neighbors. Then they'll keep getting taken advantage of, Amelia said. That's their choice to make. She paused. But some of them will see it. Give it time. She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more neighboring ranchers came by, not all of them with Amos Pritchard's directness or his clarity of purpose, but all of them pulled by the combination of news about Walter Briggs and word that Harper Ranch was doing something differently than it had been. Word traveled the way word travels in isolated communities in pieces, an accumulation the shape of a story, arriving before the details do so. That by the time a person showed up at your gate, they already had their own version of events and needed to find out how it matched reality. Nathan received all of them. He did not perform confidence. He didn't feel, which he understood was a departure from his previous instinct. He had spent 30 years projecting certainty as a management strategy. What he found himself doing now was something different, telling people the truth about what had happened, including his own role in it, including the 30 years of unquestioned tradition and inherited decisions that had created the conditions for Walter's scheme to go undetected. He told it plainly, the way Amelia had shown him how to face plain things. The response to that honesty surprised him every single time. People did not lose respect for him. Some of them seemed to gain it. Cord Willis came to Nathan on the 3rd week and asked if he could sit down and talk, and Nathan said yes, and Cord sat across from him at the kitchen table with the specific earnest discomfort of a 22-year-old who had something he felt he needed to say and wasn't sure how to say it. I've been thinking, Cord said, about how I've been doing this work. "What about it?" Nathan said. "I do what I'm told," Cord said. "I do it well. I don't ask why. I just do it." He turned his coffee cup between his palms. "Watching you and Mrs. Whitmore work through all of this, the books, the pasture, the whole thing, I've been thinking that maybe doing what you're told and not asking why is not actually the same thing as being good at your work. It's just the smaller version of it." Nathan looked at him for a long moment. "That's a fair observation," he said. "I want to be more useful than that," Cord said. "I don't exactly know what that looks like yet, but I wanted you to know that's what I'm working toward." Nathan thought about himself at 22, about what he had known and what he hadn't, and what nobody had told him that might have changed 30 years of inherited assumptions. "Here's what I'll tell you," Nathan said. "The most useful thing you can do on this ranch is ask questions about things that don't make sense to you. Not to be difficult, but because the things that don't make sense are usually pointing at something. And the man or woman who's willing to follow that pointing instead of ignoring it is worth more than 10 hands who just follow orders and stay quiet." Cord listened to this with full attention. "Yes, sir," he said. "I can do that." "I know you can," Nathan said. "I've seen you do it already." Cord left looking like a man who had received something he hadn't known he was looking for, and Nathan sat at the table after he was gone and thought about leadership, specifically about the version of it he had practiced for 3 decades, and the version of it he was beginning to understand was possible. The difference between authority and communication. The difference between a rancher who expected performance and a rancher who cultivated people. He went to find Amelia. She was at the oak table in the office, with supply contract drafts spread in front of her 3 new vendor relationships she had been developing through correspondence over the past week. All of them verified legitimate businesses with references she had checked and pricing she had compared against regional market data she had requested from Garrett Allard's office. "I need to learn how you do this," Nathan said. She looked up. "Which part?" "The assessment part, the systematic part." He sat down. "I know cattle, I know land, I know how to read weather and how to manage a herd and how to keep a fence line maintained. But you've been sitting at this table for 2 weeks and you've rebuilt the supply side of this operation from scratch. I need to understand the method so I can do it when you're not sitting across from me." Something in her expression registered that last phrase. "I'll be here," she said. "You'll be here until you decide not to be," he said. "The knowledge should live in the ranch, not just in one person. That's what Walter's situation showed me. One person holding all the knowledge of one function without oversight is how things go wrong." She looked at him for a moment. "That," she said, "is one of the most operationally intelligent things I've heard you say." "I've been learning from someone operationally intelligent," he said. She turned the contract draft toward him. "Then let's start now," she said. They spent that afternoon working through the supply contracts together. Amelia explaining her process and Nathan asking questions that were increasingly the right questions. Questions that demonstrated he was understanding the structure rather than just the details. She noticed this. She did not say so, but he caught the quality of her attention shift slightly when he asked a question that hit at the framework rather than the surface, the way a good teacher registers when a student has crossed a threshold. By 4 o'clock, the sky outside had turned the particular quality of a Montana afternoon that meant rain was a possibility, and one of the hands came to the window to flag Nathan about the cattle in the south pasture, and he excused himself to go deal with it. And Amelia went back to her contract drafts, and the ranch moved around both of them, the way a working place moves continuously, purposefully. The 10,000 small necessities of a living operation that never paused for anyone's inner reckoning. The rain came, not a serious storm, but steady and thorough, the kind that was actually useful in a dry summer. And Nathan was out in it for 2 hours, helping move cattle and dealing with a drainage situation near the eastern barn that needed immediate attention. And when he finally came back to the house, he was soaked through. His coat and his boots were collecting water at the heel. And he was in the particular mood that comes from 2 hours of hard physical problem-solving in wet conditions, which was to his own surprise a relatively good mood. He found Amelia in the kitchen. She had made coffee, which she apparently did when she needed to think about something, and she was standing at the kitchen window watching the rain with her cup in both hands, and she had the expression of someone who was very far inside her own thoughts. "Bad news," he said, because he had learned to read her expressions at least partially. She turned. "No," she said. "Not bad, just—" She paused. "I got a letter today, from Douglas's sister in St. Louis. She's been writing occasionally since Douglas died. She's concerned about me." Another pause. "She asked when I was coming home." Nathan hung his wet coat by the door. He poured himself coffee. "What did you tell her?" he said. "I haven't answered yet," Amelia said. He waited. "She means well," Amelia said. "She's been very kind since Douglas passed. But she has an idea of what my life is supposed to look like that doesn't match—" She stopped. "That doesn't match what—" Nathan said. Amelia looked at him. "That doesn't match what it actually is," she said. The kitchen was quiet, except for the rain on the roof. Nathan sat down at the table with his coffee and looked at her steadily. "What does your life actually look like?" he said. It was a direct question. He had learned directness from watching her, and it felt like the right instrument for this particular moment. She turned from the window and sat down across from him. "It looks like this," she said. "Work that uses what I know. A place where what I do matters. People who—" She chose the next word carefully. "People who take me seriously." "People do here," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what I'd have to explain to Douglas's sister. That I found a place where I'm taken seriously, and I'm not ready to leave it, and—" She looked down at her coffee cup. "She'll think I've made an error in judgment. She'll think I've been taken advantage of by a situation or by—" She didn't finish that sentence. "By me," Nathan said. She looked up. "That's what she'll think," Amelia said. "Not because she's unkind, because that's the available story. Widow goes to settle a land claim, ends up staying on as some kind of partner in the rancher's operation. From the outside that looks imprudent," Nathan said. "At best," Amelia said. He was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you think it is?" he said. "No," she said without hesitation. "Then write your sister-in-law and tell her you're well and you've found useful work and you'll come visit when the restructuring is through," Nathan said. "What other people's stories say about your choices is not the same thing as what your choices actually are." Amelia looked at him for a long moment. "When did you get good at that?" she said. "At what?" "At saying the clear thing instead of the comfortable thing." Nathan almost smiled. "I've been learning from someone who does it naturally," he said. The moment sat between them with a warmth that neither of them moved to define, and then one of the hands knocked at the kitchen door. About the drainage situation near the east barn, needing a second look. And Nathan stood up and went back out into the rain, and Amelia went back to her letters, and the ranch continued its motion around both of them. 3 days later, the first cattle moved onto the northern pasture. Nathan supervised it himself, standing at the fence line as the herd was driven through the gate he had repaired the week before, watching the animals spread across the 800 acres of grass that had been sitting empty since before he was born. The hands who were with him were quiet in the specific way of people witnessing something they understand is significant without being told it is significant. Holt stood beside Nathan. "Your father would have gotten here eventually," Holt said. "Maybe," Nathan said. "He'd have figured out the river moved." "He might have," Nathan said. "But I didn't need to wait for him to figure it out. That's the point." Holt nodded. He watched the cattle settle into the new grass. "She's something," he said, not elaborating, not needing to. "Yes, she is," Nathan said. Neither of them said anything more about it. They watched the cattle for a while, and then they went back to work because on a ranch there was always work, and the work was what the land required, whether you were in the middle of something momentous or not. The supply restructuring took the better part of a month. Amelia drove it with the same methodical force she brought to everything, and Nathan worked alongside her now in a way that was genuinely collaborative, rather than him watching her work, because he had spent the last 3 weeks actively learning what she was teaching, and he was a fast learner when he respected the source. New vendor relationships were established. Contracts were drafted with terms that Amelia reviewed against market benchmarks, and Nathan reviewed against operational practicality. And the combination of those two perspectives produced agreements that were both financially sound and logistically workable in a way that neither of them alone would have achieved as cleanly. The cattle rotation through the northern pasture began showing results within 6 weeks. The herd had more range, the existing pastures began recovering faster. The grass quality across the eastern sections, which Amelia had identified as overgrazed in her first week, began improving visibly by the end of the second month. Numbers that had been moving in the wrong direction for years began cautiously to reverse. Not dramatically, not overnight. The kind of recovery that results from systematic correction is not a sudden leap, but a steady compounding improvement, each month marginally better than the last. The whole picture only visible when you looked across enough months to see the line changing direction. Amelia tracked it all in her ledgers. She showed Nathan the numbers every 2 weeks, walking him through what each line meant and how it compared to the same period the year before, and Nathan sat across from her and read the numbers with the focused attention of a man who was genuinely understanding what he was looking at, rather than just being briefed on outcomes. One evening, about 6 weeks into the restructuring, Nathan was reviewing the month's numbers when he came to the northern pasture feed cost line and stopped. "This is better than your projection," he said. "Yes," Amelia said. "By how much?" "About 12%. He looked at her. "You projected conservatively," he said. "I always project conservatively," she said. "If I'm right, good. If I'm wrong upward." "Who taught you that?" She considered the question. "My father," she said. "He ran a dry goods business in Ohio when I was growing up. He always said you plan for what you're certain of and you let the upside surprise you. He said men who plan for what they hope for tend to run out of money before the hope arrives." "Smart man," Nathan said. "He was," she said. "He died when I was 19. Douglas came along the year after, and Douglas was—" She paused. "Douglas was a good man. He was not my father's kind of businessman. He trusted people the way my father always said you should verify people. It cost him." She paused again. "It cost us both." Nathan set the ledger down. "Tell me about him," he said. "If you want to." She looked at him. The offer seemed to catch her slightly off balance, which told him that people did not often make it that the general approach of people around her grief was either to avoid the subject or to offer condolences that closed the door rather than opened it. "He was kind," she said. "Genuinely. He thought well of people automatically before they gave him reason to. I used to tease him about it." She looked at her hands. "I don't tease people about that anymore. Because he was right to think well of people. Because the cost of thinking badly of people is loneliness," she said. "And I've had enough of that." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Do you think well of me?" he asked. She looked at him directly. "I think you are a man who spent 30 years protecting something he loved in the wrong ways," she said, "and who was given a chance to understand that, and who took it instead of fighting it, which is harder than it sounds, and rarer than it should be." She paused. "Yes, I think well of you." He held her gaze. "I think well of you too," he said. "I want you to know that, not as a business partner, as a—" He stopped, searched for the right word. "As a person," she said quietly, completing it without pressure, just accurately. "Yes," he said, "as a person I'm glad came through that gate, even though I did my level best to make her feel unwelcome when she did." Something moved through her expression that was not the almost smile, but was deeper than that something that touched the part of her that had been carrying a particular loneliness since Douglas died, and that was perhaps beginning to ease slightly. "You weren't unwelcome," she said. "You were frightened." "I wasn't frightened," he said, automatic and immediate. She raised an eyebrow. He stopped. I was frightened, he admitted. Of the land claim, she said. Of someone who could see what I hadn't been looking at, he said. Of someone who walked onto this ranch and looked at it like a question instead of an answer. That's what scared me, because I had been treating it like an answer for 30 years. Amelia was quiet. Nathan, she said. Yes. I was frightened too, she said. When I got on that wagon in town to come out here, I had all my documents and my notebook and I had the argument I'd rehearsed and I was terrified. You didn't show it. I know, she said. I've gotten very good at not showing it. He nodded. We're alike in that, he said. We are in some ways, she said. Different in the ways that matter for working together. Yes, he said. That's exactly right. They sat in the comfortable quiet of that. For a moment, two people who had found unexpectedly the specific relief of being understood by someone who was not trying to manage them. Then Amelia picked up her pen and went back to the ledger, and Nathan went back to the numbers, and outside the ranch moved in its steady living rhythm, and the northern pasture held 800 acres of cattle working through the best grass in the county. And the supply contracts ran clean and honest, and Holt Decker ran a bunkhouse of men who were working better than they had in years, because the clarity coming down from the main house had changed the temperature of the whole operation. It was in the 4th week after the restructuring was largely complete that the next thing happened. The thing none of them had seen coming. A rider came in from the West Road mid-morning on a Wednesday, a man Nathan didn't recognize, well-dressed for travel on a good horse that had clearly come some distance. He asked for Nathan by name at the gate, and Cord Willis brought him up to the yard with the slightly formal alertness of a young man who had been told to pay attention to things that felt off. Nathan met him at the porch. Mr. Harper, the man said. My name is Sterling Voss. I represent a land acquisition consortium based in Denver. We've had Harper Ranch on our interest list for about 3 years. I'm here because we've heard the operation has undergone some significant changes recently, and our principals wanted me to make a fresh assessment. He reached into his coat. I have a letter of interest. We'd like to discuss a purchase offer. Nathan looked at him. He looked at the letter. He did not take it. I'm not selling, he said. Mr. Harper, if you'd look at the number, I've looked at enough numbers this season to last me, Nathan said. I know what this ranch is worth, and I know what it's becoming, and I'm not selling either of those things to a Denver consortium. Sterling Voss had the patient expression of a man who had been told no before and treated it as a stage in a longer conversation. Our offer would represent a very substantial, Mr. Voss, Nathan said, and something in his voice shifted to the register that ended conversations. You're welcome to water your horse before you head back. Cord will see to that, but there's no purchase conversation to have here, now or later. He turned around and went back inside. He heard Voss's horse being led to the water trough. He heard it leave 20 minutes later. He went to the office where Amelia was working and told her what had happened, and she set her pen down and looked at him. A Denver consortium, she said. That's what he said. 3 years on their interest list. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Sterling Voss, she said. What did he look like? Nathan described him. Amelia picked her pen back up and wrote the name in her notebook. I'd like to find out who his consortium is, she said. Not because it changes your answer, just because I'd want to know who's been watching this ranch for 3 years. Why does that matter? Because people who watch ranches in financial difficulty for years sometimes have ways of making the difficulty worse when they want to move, she said. It may be nothing. Walter Briggs's scheme may have been entirely his own, but I'd feel better knowing. Nathan looked at her. Check it, he said. She nodded and made a note. He stood at the office doorway for a moment, looking at her bent over the notebook, her pen moving with that compact, deliberate efficiency that was as recognizable to him now as his own handwriting. And he thought about Sterling Voss riding away with his letter of interest unread back to Denver, and his consortium, and whatever calculation of Harper Ranch's distress had put them on their interest list 3 years ago. And he felt something that was not quite satisfaction, but was close to it. The particular solidity of a man who has been asked the price of something he is not selling and knows exactly why he is not selling it. He had spent 30 years defending this land. Now, for the first time, he was beginning to understand what it meant to deserve it. And the woman sitting at his office table, who had come through his gate 20 days ago with a suitcase and a land claim, and the most uncomfortable set of questions anyone had ever brought to Harper Ranch, was a considerable part of why that understanding had finally arrived. He was not going to waste it. Neither was she. Amelia found the Denver consortium in 11 days. She did it the way she did everything, methodically, without drama, following the thread from Sterling Voss's name through a chain of business registrations and land acquisition filings that Garrett Allard's office helped her pull from county records in 3 states. She did not say anything to Nathan about what she was finding until she had the complete picture, because she had learned through Douglas's situation and through her own experience that incomplete information presented too early had a way of producing decisions that felt right in the moment and were wrong in the execution. When she had the complete picture, she came to find Nathan in the south barn, where he was working with one of the hands on a section of equipment that had needed attention for a month and had finally been getting it. "When you have a minute," she said. He looked at her expression. "I have a minute now," he said. He told the hand to carry on and followed Amelia back to the office, and she laid it out for him the same way she had laid out the Walter Briggs situation documents in order, her notes organized. So the logic was followable, the conclusion reached at the end rather than the beginning, so he could track the reasoning rather than just receive the outcome. Sterling Voss's Denver consortium was called Meridian Land Partners. It was a legitimate business, properly registered, operating in 4 western states, and it had a clear and documented pattern. It identified ranches showing signs of financial stress, placed them on a monitoring list, and waited. When the stress reached a sufficient point, it moved with a purchase offer. The offers were not predatory on their face. They were, in fact, fair market value, or occasionally slightly above. What they were not was the actual value of the land being purchased, which was consistently higher than the stressed seller understood, because the seller was making decisions from inside the distress and not from a clear view of what the land could become under different management. "They're not criminals," Amelia said. "What they do is legal." "But they benefit from other people's problems," Nathan said. "Yes. And in some cases, from problems that were made worse." She turned a page in her notes. 3 of the ranches on their acquisition list in the last 5 years had supply contract irregularities before they were purchased. 2 of those ranches used supply managers who later had legal trouble of their own. Nathan went very still. "You're saying Walter Briggs wasn't working alone," he said. "I'm saying I don't know that he was," Amelia said carefully. "I'm saying the pattern is there, and I think it deserves a closer look. Garrett should see this. Garrett is going to want to know how you found all of this. Garrett is going to be grateful that someone did," she said. She was right on both counts. Garrett Allard sat in the Harper Ranch office 2 days later with Amelia's compiled research spread in front of him and the expression of a man who was revising his understanding of a situation he had thought he already understood. He asked questions. She answered them. He asked follow-ups. She had the supporting documents already marked. At the end of an hour, he sat back in his chair and looked at Nathan. "Your supply manager may have been recruited," he said. "Not just operating independently. There's enough here that I want to share it with the county sheriff and potentially with a federal land office contact I have in Helena. If Meridian Land Partners has been actively seeding financial distress in target ranches, that is not a legal business practice. That is fraud at a considerably larger scale than what Walter Briggs did alone. Will that slow down the action against Walter?" Nathan asked. "No. If anything, it may strengthen it if Walter can be persuaded to discuss the larger relationship in exchange for consideration on his own charges." Garrett paused. People in Walter's position, when they understand that the person above them in a scheme may escape consequences while they bear the full weight, often become cooperative. "Will he talk?" Amelia said. I think, Garrett said, that when Walter Briggs understands the full picture of what he was part of, he will talk very clearly indeed. He was right. Walter talked to the county sheriff 6 days later in a conversation that lasted 3 hours, and the picture that emerged from that conversation was larger and more deliberate than even Amelia's research had suggested. Meridian Land Partners had, through an intermediary who connected financially troubled supply managers with the consortium's representatives, created a network of embedded agents in vulnerable ranch operations across 4 states. The agents inflated costs, suppressed recovery opportunities, and fed information about the ranch's financial state back to the consortium, which used that information to time their purchase offers for maximum effect. Walter Briggs had been recruited 7 years earlier, not 8, as Nathan had believed, which meant the first year of the scheme had predated what Amelia found in the records, and the total amount was larger. When Nathan heard that, he sat down, not because the additional year surprised him particularly, because of the specific nature of the recruitment. Walter had been at a horse sale in Billings, had gotten into a conversation with a man he didn't know. Over the course of an evening, had been flattered and listened to and made to feel for the first time in years like a man whose knowledge and access were valuable. The man had explained what he was proposing carefully and over several meetings, framing it as a simple business arrangement, something that happened all the time in larger commercial operations, nothing that would seriously hurt anyone. Walter had told himself that story for 7 years. The sheriff's office contacted the federal land office. The federal land office contacted partners in 3 other states. Meridian Land Partners, which had been a legal and profitable business for 11 years, found itself the subject of a federal investigation within 3 weeks of Garrett Allard's first call. Sterling Voss. Nathan learned later had been in the Denver offices when the investigators arrived and had not by all accounts taken it well. Nathan felt something when he heard that, but it was not satisfaction exactly. It was more complex than satisfaction. It was the particular uncomfortable feeling of understanding that a thing you thought was your private problem was actually part of a much larger one, that the 30 years of Harper Ranch moving in the wrong direction had been partly his own mistakes, and partly something that had been deliberately made worse by people he had never met who stood to profit from his failure. He told Amelia that. She was quiet for a moment. "Does it change anything?" she said. "What do you mean?" "About your responsibility," she said. "Does knowing that some of it was deliberately engineered make the parts that were your own choices feel different?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "Not really. The northern pasture was my father's grief and my own unwillingness to question it. That's got nothing to do with Meridian Land Partners. The way I ran the books, the fact that I never had anyone reviewing Walter's contracts, the 30 years of trusting tradition over examination, those were mine. The fact that someone took advantage of that doesn't move the responsibility." Amelia looked at him. "No," she said quietly. "It doesn't, but it does explain why the damage was as deep as it was. And it means the recovery you've built here is against a harder headwind than most people will ever know." "Does that matter?" he asked. "It matters to me," she said. "I want you to know that what you've done here in the last 2 months is harder than it looks from the outside." He looked at her. "You've been watching from the inside," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's why I know." The letter from Douglas's sister arrived on the same day that the first formal recovery payment from the Walter Briggs civil action came through. Amelia opened both at the kitchen table, while Nathan was out checking the northern pasture, and she read the letter twice, and set it beside the recovery notice, and sat with both of them for a while. The letter was not unkind. Douglas's sister was a practical woman named Clara, who had raised 4 children in St. Louis, and who wrote the way she spoke directly and with genuine affection and no patience for indirection. She said she was glad to hear that Amelia had found useful work and was not worried about her in the practical sense, but that she wanted Amelia to be careful about confusing gratitude and connection, that widows in Amelia's position were sometimes vulnerable to circumstances that looked like rescue from the outside, and that she trusted Amelia's judgment but was asking her to use it. Amelia read that part a 3rd time. When Nathan came in from the pasture, she was still at the kitchen table, and he looked at her expression and poured them both coffee without asking and sat down. "Clara wrote," she said. "What did she say?" Amelia told him honestly and in full. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is she right to be concerned? About widows being vulnerable? In general, yes," Amelia said. "About me specifically?" She paused. "I've thought about it. I've been thinking about it since her last letter. And I came here with a land claim and a notebook," she said. "I was not in distress. I was in grief, which is different. I didn't need rescue. I didn't need someone to take care of me. What I found here was work that mattered and people who took me seriously. And—" She stopped. "And," he said. She looked at him steadily. "And a man who I watch change every week," she said. "Not because he's trying to impress me, because he's actually changing. That's rare, Nathan. That's rarer than this ranch or any amount of recovered money or restructured contracts. A man who actually changes because he understood why he needed to. I've been watching that happen from close range for 2 months, and it doesn't look like anything I need to be rescued from. It looks like something I don't want to walk away from." Nathan was very still. "Amelia," he said. "I know," she said. "I know what I'm saying." "Do you know what I want to say?" "I think so," she said. "But say it anyway." He set his coffee cup down. "I have been alone in this house for 8 years," he said, "and I told myself that was fine, that I had the ranch and the work, and that was sufficient for a man. I believed that right up until a woman stepped out of a livery wagon and refused to be impressed by my gait." He paused. "I don't know how to do this particularly well. I haven't had practice. And I want to be clear about what I'm asking, which is not an arrangement, and not a business convenience, and not something that emerged from gratitude. It's something that started the day I watched you crouch down in the east pasture and explain to me why my grass was thin, and it's been growing since then, whether I wanted it to or not." Amelia's expression was entirely open in a way he had rarely seen it. "I'm not a convenient woman," she said. "No, ma'am," he said. "You are not remotely convenient. You are the most inconvenient thing that has ever come through that gate. I will always tell you what I actually think. I know that. I'm counting on it. I will not disappear into this ranch the way women are sometimes expected to. I will be a full partner, or I won't be here. That's what I want," he said. "That is exactly what I want." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then yes," she said simply. The words sat between them solid and clear and real. He reached across the table and took her hand, and she let him. And they sat in the kitchen of Harper Ranch on a Tuesday morning with a recovery notice and a letter from St. Louis and 2 cups of cooling coffee, and outside the northern pasture held 800 acres of cattle, and the supply contracts ran honest, and the ranch hands were doing work that meant something. And it was not a grand romantic moment in the way that stories sometimes dress these things up. It was better than that. It was real. They told Holt first. He received it with the expression of a man who had known it was coming for at least 3 weeks and was relieved to have it confirmed. He shook Nathan's hand. He tipped his hat to Amelia. He said, "About time," which was the longest editorial he had offered on anything personal in 16 years, and then he went back to work. They told Garrett Allard in a letter which he responded to with a formal note of congratulations and a postscript that said he would draw up a revised partnership agreement incorporating the change in circumstances, which was exactly the kind of response you wanted from an attorney. Amelia wrote to Clara in St. Louis. She wrote it in one sitting, which meant she had been composing it in her head for some time. She told Clara what had happened at Harper Ranch from the beginning, not the summary, but the full account. The ledgers, the Northern Pasture Walter Briggs and Meridian Land Partners, the formal agreement, the work, and Nathan. She told Clara about Nathan with the careful specificity of a woman who knew the difference between infatuation and recognition, and who understood that what she had found at Harper Ranch was the second thing. Clara wrote back in 2 weeks. Her letter said, "I still think widows should be careful. I also think you have never in your life done anything without being certain of your reasons. I am glad you found work that matters and a man who sees you. Come visit when you can." The wedding was small. Neither of them wanted ceremony. What they wanted was the thing to be real and witnessed and recorded, and so they gathered Holt and Cord and 3 other ranch hands who had been with the outfit through the hard months, and Garrett Allard, who had the legal standing to perform a civil ceremony in Montana. And they stood in the yard of Harper Ranch on a cool October morning and made it legal and permanent in front of the people who knew what it meant. Cord Willis cried. He looked mortified about it and tried to conceal it with a series of increasingly unconvincing coughs, and Holt Decker looked straight ahead with the fixed expression of a man exercising significant personal discipline, and the other 3 hands applauded when Garrett concluded the proceedings, and it was the best morning Harper Ranch had produced in years. After, when the hands had dispersed back to the work and Garrett had headed to town, Nathan and Amelia stood in the yard together in the October cool, and Nathan looked out at the ranch the way he sometimes did when he needed to take the full measure of something. "What are you thinking?" Amelia said. "I'm thinking about my grandfather," he said. "He started this with 600 acres and a borrowed plow. He built it because he believed in what it could become, not just in what it was." "Yes," she said. "I spent 30 years defending what it was," he said. "I think he would have had things to say about that." "What do you think he would have said?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I think he would have said that the land doesn't need defending," he said. "The land endures. What needs tending is the people and the decisions and the willingness to keep asking whether what you're doing is still right." He paused. "I think he would have liked you." "I think I would have liked him," Amelia said. She took his arm and they stood in the yard of Harper Ranch while the October morning moved around them 4,000 acres, and the particular silence of a place that had been fought for and nearly lost and recovered through the hardest kind of work, and both of them knew that what they had built here was not a finished thing. It was a beginning. The winter that year was hard, the way Montana winters are uncompromising and without apology, and Harper Ranch moved through it better than it had moved through a winter in a decade. The new supply contracts held. The northern pasture cattle came through in good condition. The financial records stayed clean and comprehensible and reviewed regularly by 2 pairs of eyes that caught different things and were better together than either was separately. Cord Willis turned 23 in February, and Nathan gave him additional responsibilities, formal ones, with a conversation about what they were and why. And Cord listened with the attentiveness he always brought now to things that mattered, and went away and did the work without being reminded, which was exactly what Nathan had seen in him and had wanted to develop. Holt Decker, who had been at Harper Ranch for 17 years, by the time the snow came, began teaching some of the younger hands things he had been carrying around in his own knowledge for years without a framework for transmitting them. It had been Amelia who had pointed out to him in one of the quiet conversations they had developed over the months that knowledge held only in one person was a liability to an operation which was something Holt had never quite framed that way, but recognized immediately as true once she said it. The county sheriff's investigation into Meridian Land Partners moved through its process with the methodical pace of legal machinery, which was to say, slowly but consistently. 3 other ranches in Montana were identified as having had similar embedded arrangements to what Walter Briggs had provided, and their owners, once the picture was explained to them, responded with the range of emotions that the situation warranted. Anger, shame, relief at understanding, and in several cases the particular species of gratitude that comes from learning. You are not entirely the author of your own difficulties. Nathan knew those feelings. He drove out to 2 of those ranches himself because Amelia suggested it and he thought she was right, and he sat with those ranchers and told them honestly what had happened at Harper Ranch, and what the recovery had looked like, and that it was possible, and that the first step was getting an honest accounting from someone who could read what the books actually said. He did not mention Amelia's name in those conversations. She found out anyway because Holt heard it from the hand of one of the ranchers, and she came to find Nathan and told him she knew. He waited to see whether she minded. "Why didn't you say my name?" she said. Because the story they needed was that recovery was possible, he said. Not that they needed a particular person to make it happen. I didn't want them to feel like they needed what I had specifically. I wanted them to feel like they could find their own version of it. She looked at him. That, she said, is the most generous interpretation of a thing I have heard in a long time. I learned it from someone, he said. She shook her head slightly the way she did when she was moved by something and was not going to say so directly, and went back to her work. The civil recovery from the Walter Briggs action came through fully in March. The amount meaningfully less than the total taken, but significantly more than Garrett Allard had initially projected, because the documentation Amelia had built was thorough enough that several additional channels of recovery had been identified that wouldn't have been found with a less complete record. The Wyoming property sold, and the proceeds were attached to the judgment, and the final number when Garrett presented it made Nathan sit back in his chair and exhale slowly. "That's more than I expected," he said. "That's because the documentation was complete," Garrett said, "which is what I told you it would be back in October." "You were right," Nathan said. "I'm frequently right," Garrett said. "People don't always listen." Nathan wrote a letter to Amelia's sister-in-law Clara that afternoon. Not because Amelia asked him to. She hadn't known he was going to do it. He wrote it because he thought it was right, because Clara had asked good questions about her sister-in-law's welfare, and deserved to know from the man himself what kind of situation she was actually in. He wrote that he understood Clara's concern that it was warranted, and showed the kind of care a person deserved from family that he could not offer her absolute certainty because no one could, but that he wanted her to know that Amelia Whitmore had not been taken advantage of, or rescued, or convinced of anything she did not fully understand. That she had come to Harper Ranch with clear eyes, and had changed it with the force of what she knew and who she was, and that the direction of help in the whole situation had, if he was being precise about it, run primarily from Amelia toward him rather than the other direction. He told Clara that he intended to spend the rest of his life being worthy of the trouble. Clara wrote back in 3 weeks. Her letter said, "Mr. Harper, I believe you. That is not something I say easily or often. Please take care of her. She is not as difficult to hurt as she looks." He showed the letter to Amelia. She read it in silence. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "She's right," Amelia said quietly. "About that last part." "I know," Nathan said. "I'll be careful." "Don't be careful," she said. "Careful is what people do when they're still halfway out the door. Just be present." "Yes," he said. "I can do that." Spring came, the way spring comes to Montana, reluctantly, and then all at once, and Harper Ranch moved into its second year, under the new arrangement, with the specific confidence of an operation that had been tested hard and had held. The northern pasture came back into rotation, with the practiced efficiency of a second season, the hands knowing the process now, the cattle knowing the ground, the whole system settling into the rhythm that meant it was going to last. Amos Pritchard's cooperative purchasing arrangement, which Amelia had sketched in her notebook the afternoon Amos had stayed 2 hours, had grown by spring into a formal agreement among 4 neighboring ranches, with verified suppliers and transparent pricing, and a shared review process that meant nobody's supply manager could inflate costs without 4 sets of eyes catching it. 3 of the 4 ranchers involved had told Nathan privately that they'd already identified small savings they wouldn't have found on their own. Amelia tracked all of it. Not because she had to, because she was the kind of person who believed that the things you build deserve to be understood clearly, that clarity is a form of respect for the work, and that the only way to know if something is getting better is to be honest about what it was. One evening in April, Nathan found her on the porch in the last of the daylight. Her notebook closed for once, just sitting with the evening, the way she rarely sat with anything without working. He sat beside her. "You're not working," he said. "No," she said. "What are you doing?" She was quiet for a moment. "I'm just here," she said. He understood what that meant. He had watched her for 7 months now, watched the particular quality of a person who had been in motion for so long that stillness felt unsafe, gradually learning to trust that a place could hold still without collapsing, That presence was something you could afford. Good, he said. They sat in the April evening together, and the ranch settled around them into its night sounds, cattle and horses, and the wind moving through the new grass of the northern pasture, 800 acres away. And everything that had been wrong about Harper Ranch was in the process of becoming something else. And the two people sitting on the porch who had made that happen knew it in the particular quiet way that people know the things that cost them the most to learn. Nathan reached over and took Amelia's hand. She turned it palm up and held his. "I've been thinking about your grandfather," she said. "What about him?" "About what he started," she said. "And what you're going to add to it now." She paused. "The story people tell about this ranch is going to be a different one than the one they were telling a year ago." "What story do you think they'll tell?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I think they'll tell the story of a rancher who was brave enough to stop defending what he had and start building what was possible," she said. "And I think some of them, the ones who knew the whole truth of it, will tell it correctly." She paused. "Which means they'll say it started when a woman came through the gate with a suitcase and refused to leave until someone told her the truth." Nathan looked out at the 4,000 acres of his grandfather's faith and his father's work and his own 30 years of stubborn loving, sometimes misguided stewardship, and the 800 acres of grass that had been waiting since before he was born for someone to stop being afraid of it. And beside him, the woman who had seen all of it clearly from the first day and had stayed anyway. "Let them tell it that way," he said. "Every word of it is true. Harper Ranch did not become the largest spread in Montana. It became something better than the largest. It became the one people pointed to when they wanted to talk about what an operation run with honesty and intelligence and the willingness to question its own assumptions looked like. It became the one where young hands went to learn not just how to work cattle, but how to think about what they were doing and why. It became the one where neighboring ranchers came when they had problems they couldn't see clearly, because the woman in the main house had a reputation for seeing clearly and for telling you what she saw, even when it was not what you wanted to hear. Years later, when people asked Amelia Harper how she had done it, how she had walked onto a stranger's ranch with nothing but a land claim and a notebook and rebuilt it in a season, she said the same thing every time. "I just asked the questions everyone else was afraid to ask," she said. "And I didn't leave until I understood the answers." And when they asked Nathan Harper what the turning point had been, what the moment was when everything changed, he said without hesitation, "The morning a widow stepped out of a livery wagon at my gate and looked at my ranch like a question instead of an answer, and I was finally brave enough to want to know what she was going to find." Because that is what Harper Ranch was in the end. Not the monument Nathan had tried to preserve. Not the frozen inheritance of 3 generations of men who trusted tradition over examination. It was a living thing built by 2 people who were honest about what it was and fearless about what it could become, and it endured, not because it refused to change, but because the people standing on it finally understood that the greatest act of faith was not holding the line. It was having the courage to move it forward. And they did. Together and without apology, and for the rest of their lives.